All right, well, we are a couple of minutes past the top of the hour, wherever you are. So I think it's time we get started. We have a lot to cover today. So welcome to the latest edition of CWR Academy and this webinar, Creating More Successful Communications, Tips to Enhance Both Your Story and Your Design. I'm Robert Cogswell. I'm a member of the Education Committee with CWR, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. And because we are communicators for women religious, we do like to open up with a little prayer. So bear with me as I switch my screen out and allow you to see this little prayer that has been created for today. Try and make that a little larger. Here we go. All right, loving and gracious God, thank you for providing all the elements we need to successfully carry your love into the world. Fill our speakers and our attendees with clarity, passion, and creative sparks. Light up both our biggest ideas and our micro edits that make our messages work. Guide our collaborations to help your good news spread and bloom in new places. Amen. So without further ado, just to give you a quick rundown on some operations with webinars versus the flash conversations that we often offer. Today with the webinar, we're only viewing our panelists and hearing our panelists. There's no grid full of faces like we have on flash conversations, and you are muted. So you're just hopefully listening and able to ask questions. We do want to encourage you asking questions. However, our panelists have quite a few slides and a lot of content to share with you today. So we're going to ask to hold most questions until the end. We'll have some Q&A session at the end. And we'll try and pay attention to the chat and the Q&A feature. And if there are any unanswered questions at the end, then Susan has offered to share her email and she will address those. We are also recording. It's a webinar, so we are recording this session, which will be available later on CWR's website. And in case you need to duck out or you need to recapture what was said, you can revisit today's webinar on the CWR website. So it's my pleasure to welcome Susan Flansburg and Chris Mandle today. Susan is, well, she's one of us. She's a CWR associate and a former communications director for the Benedictine Sisters of Rock Island. She is now a principal at her own company, Flansburg Civil Communications. And on a personal note, I have hired Susan a couple of times and have never been disappointed. She's been a great asset to help me out. Chris and Susan have worked together for over a decade. And I love in his bio, if you caught this on the materials, that he was a double major in theology and graphic design. So the best of both worlds to help us out. And he's been serving nonprofits and the Catholic community of parishes and schools and other ministries for several years. So in short, they get it. They understand how to successfully meet people where they are and create content that lands successfully. So without further ado, I will ask Susan and Chris to take it away.
Thanks, Rob. And we'll say good morning or afternoon. If you want to start our PowerPoint.
Yep, happy to see everybody today. We're going to come off screen here, but allow you to come behind the curtain a little bit, and we're happy to share our content with you here today. Just a second here. Does that look okay on your end, Rob? Okay.
All right. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you find yourself today. We here in the Midwest are revisiting the tropical weather that marked the start of June for us. Fortunately, the kids are back in the pools and off at camp around here, so many parents are able to focus a bit more on work. My partner in crime today, Chris, who will introduce himself in a minute, knows something about that with 5 kids of his own. When Rob asked me to consider leading a webinar, my immediate instinct was to say, no way. After all, you're all communications professionals. What in the world can I tell you that you don't already know? But years ago, I made a commitment to myself to say yes to things I wanted to say no to. So here Chris and I are to share some of our own creative experiences in the hope that you'll gain a nugget or two. We had fun collaborating on it, and we're very happy to be here. First, some background. Chris and I are from the Quad Cities, a metropolitan area that straddles the mighty Mississippi River and spans both Illinois and Iowa. We're a 3-hour drive from Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin. We're an hour from Iowa City and the University of Iowa, where I earned my degree in English. I worked in a broadcast newsroom before moving on to an ad agency. With every professional move, I learned to tell stories with fewer and fewer words, beginning with multiple-paged English themes at the university, chopped down to 30-second stories for TV, and ending with 7-word billboards at the ad agency. When I took the job with the Benedictines in Rock Island, Illinois as communications director, I wrote in every style and to every word count I had ever used. I was a department of one, doing all the writing, editing, photographing, designing, and every other task associated with communications. While I wasn't educated to do those tasks, I was familiar with them thanks to my role in advertising as both creative director and writer. It was fun, but I missed one of the most critical elements of successful creative work: collaboration. Bringing writing and design together in the concept phase produces not only better work, it makes it more fun and satisfying. I made the case to hire out a designer, and my then prioress, a visionary woman, said yes. Our communications benefited dramatically. Today, I work with my longtime design collaborator, Chris, to craft communications for a range of nonprofit organizations, from Catholic Sisters to the Chamber of Commerce. I've been a member of CWR since 2003 and also maintain membership in the Catholic Media Association. Chris?
I'm very happy to be joining Susan and sharing some time with all of you today. A little bit of background on myself. I'm a graduate of St. Ambrose University here in the Quad Cities, and I was a proud double major in graphic design and theology, which I have to be honest, at the time seemed a little like a crazy combination of majors to have. I always knew that graphic design and marketing was my calling, but I often wondered how a theology background would mesh with that and what in the world I was going to use this degree on. After some time working at a local marketing firm, I started to acquire my own freelance clients, and eventually I got enough. And eventually it got to the point where it was time to take that next scary big step and venture out on my own. Part of the reason I was able to do this was because of my own Catholic background and all the Catholic circles I ran around in and where I volunteered my time, namely my parish and places like St. Ambrose University. You probably all know how it goes. Once you know someone in your local Catholic circle or community, it starts to turn into family. You know someone, and then they know someone else that needs your help, and so on and so forth. I quickly found myself with a slew of Catholic-centric clients, and suddenly everything sort of clicked, that perhaps there was some divine providence in my very strange combination of degrees. I often joke about, but I'm also quite serious, that graphic design is really just evangelization. As graphic designers, we're not preaching the gospel, but we are communicating very important messages and themes and stories in the work that we do. This webinar today will share some of what Susan and I have learned over the years about the twin pillars of successful communication: story and layout. We'll offer you some tips today to help you present a compelling, coherent, interesting, and understandable message that attracts and retains readership.
We'll start with a look at the Benedictine Sisters Connecting Point newsletter. These 4 issues were chosen to reflect an evolution of design over time that Chris will talk about a bit later. But they also showcase some principles that are key to attracting and retaining readership. Whether your readers are friends and family who dig the newsletter out of their mailbox, or strangers who pick it up off a table in a coffee shop, they need to get hooked by the presentation in order to take the time and the effort to read it. In other words, presentation, which includes things like headline, deck, image, font, layout, and other things, must be fresh, contemporary, relevant, and coherent. Freshening up your approach to the story itself is especially important when your subjects, the sisters, have been known for the same ministries and the same values for decades. How do you make those stories fresh, contemporary, and relevant? Begin with your own curiosity. The stories in this commemorative issue of Connecting Point piqued my interest because I went looking for things I didn't already know. I began by asking alumni via email and Facebook for their favorite memories. Lots of fun stories flooded in from them, and I was able to excerpt many. I also combed the archives for a story that no one would know and found one that was simply unbelievable. A nun had calmed the waters like Jesus himself during a horrific storm as she accompanied terrified high school girls across the Mississippi River on a rickety skiff in 1908. The story had been written years later by a teacher who was also aboard. Of course, there weren't any photos. I hired an illustrator who worked with me to create this illustration. The headline, Miracle on the Mississippi, was written to echo the kind of apocryphal but intriguing stories you see in the tabloids at the checkout counter. If I were to give you one piece of advice on how to choose your story, it would be to find what interests you about it. My assignment in this case was to fill the commemorative issue with appropriate stories. The stories I chose interested me, always a good indication that they'll interest your reader. You don't always get to choose your own topic, of course, but ideally you can choose how to approach it. A story on a retreat can include a retreatant who shares a touching story. A story about a ministry can be told from the perspective of someone who benefited from it. Telling great stories is often a matter of finding the most interesting way into them. In this issue, I asked sisters to share their wisdom with readers in the form of their favorite advice, whether they had received or given it. We'll do a deeper dive into how this theme played out through the issue, but I'll just touch on the cover elements here. The headline includes a catchy term, 2 cents, for the word advice. The number stands out in the headline, both because it's not typical nun speak and because it suggests value. But more than anything else, it's just a number. Using a number in your headline increases its readability both in print and online. Content marketing guru Neil Patel cites studies that show headlines with numbers tend to generate 73% more social shares and engagements. The marriage of the headline to the illustration and content of the story here is also critical. It not only describes the photo above it, it promises exactly what the story delivers. Decks are also quite useful. Here, Benedictine sisters share favorite advice. The deck promises specific content in the story. It's not as large as the headline, but is larger than the body copy. It too increases reader attention. Here, you want to give more clarity about the article without giving everything away. The photo itself was professionally taken to show sisters listening to one another. It conveys a sense of monastic quiet and serenity, appropriate to the story as well as to their lifestyle. And while we normally, or often anyway, caption most photos, photos chosen for the front cover do heavy lifting theme-wise. They're less focused on the specific and rarely require captions. Every issue of Connecting Point focused primarily on spirituality because monastic women like the Benedictines are usually better known for that than their ministries. This issue was about making the concept of resurrection personal and daily, as opposed to associated only with Jesus at Easter. The sisters shared how they give assent to God's invitation to that daily resurrection, moment to moment. The marriage of image to headline here is clear, with the sun providing its own daily resurrection. The photo was taken at dark 30 by a professional photographer with yours truly in tow. We took many, many photos to be sure we got the one. This was another dark 30 story in which I followed an avid bird watcher sister around the grounds and into the woods, notebook in hand. She was well covered with hat and long sleeves. I, on the other hand, sleeveless and hatless, was besieged by gnats and mosquitoes, but got a good story anyway. The theme, cultivating peace and presence, is reflected in the photo and carried through the issue by sisters sharing their own contemplative practices, whether in nature, in chapel, or in the now of whatever they're doing. Chris?
As we can see from the earliest edition in the spring of 2015 to the last one on the far right, over time, this publication evolved as we sought to better and better ways to first engage our readers. In the earliest edition, you'll see that the text itself took up a lot more real estate on the front cover. A great illustration paired with a wonderful title and, of course, the obligatory branding. As our collaboration progressed, we decided we wanted to better compete for people's attention, and to achieve that, we needed to adapt Connecting Point to more the look and feel of a magazine. To first achieve this, as shown in our second edition on screen here, was committing a much larger portion of the real estate of the cover to a dominant photo that would work well in tandem to the title of our lead story. By committing to this, it also challenged us not to simply settle on photography that may be just okay or maybe good enough to get the job done. Rather, we needed to be more committed than ever to marry the perfect image with our title and theme. At this point in the evolution of this publication, you'll notice that the photo has now taken on 50% of the space on our covers. On the next cover to the right, we see further evolution of this design where we've deployed the use of the Benedictine blue. At this point in the process, we decided it was good to bring in more of the branding color to the cover. We also give a special treatment here using that same blue and in the same font as our titles, as you will notice with the subtitles. Finally, our last edition on the right shows the last iteration of Connecting Point. Now, if we stop for a minute and look from left to right across the screen, you'll notice that the main image or illustration only took up about 20% of the cover when we started. The middle two editions show that now 50% of the cover is occupied by these dominant photos. And in the very last version, we have a much fuller magazine style experience with our image now dominating pretty much 100% of the page. The Connecting Point brand also evolved over the course of time, culminating with what you see on the right in the bottom right-hand corner. In each example, we've massaged the layout to best complement the theme of the edition as we work through evolving design elements. In the end, we developed a pretty stellar and striking publication for the Benedictines in Rock Island. But the work didn't end there. We had people's attention, but the theme and story needed to also carry through to the interior pages as well.
It takes both design and content to create a cohesive and coherent message. But the content must also be relevant and interesting to the reader. Offering advice from a sister is inherently both relevant and interesting to the readers of the Benedictine newsletter, and probably your newsletters too. Getting the nuns to share their favorite piece of advice was easy. Everyone wants to tell her story. Everyone wants to be heard. The theme tracked a couple different ways here based on the interviews. Some sisters shared their own wisdom, while others shared the importance of listening to and for wisdom. This was great. It touched on the Benedictine value of listening. The first word in Benedict's holy rule is listen, while offering some other image ideas. The cover photo bridged both themes, showing both a listening and sharing stance between the sisters. Another good photo was taken in the sisters' library, as you see on the left. It shows them listening to one another during a book discussion. Although they do have discussions like this during their life formation meetings, this was set up formally and photographed professionally. One of the sisters in the right side, the right spread, chose to advise readers to be forgiving, saying a deeper wound is caused by withholding forgiveness. So the photo on this spread is simply a hand placed gently on the back. The theme of listening is carried into the next story, where Sister Mary recounts a moment of anguish in which she begged God for help and then quieted and simply listened. She found herself transported in her mind to a park bench next to Jesus, where she felt profound oneness with him. This was an easy story to illustrate, filled as the grounds are with benches. It was left empty for the photo, in contrast to the cover, which had two sisters. This was to allow more editorial quiet and to align with the message from Sister Mary. The final story offers advice on how to give advice, basically echoing St. Benedict's words, to listen with the ear of the heart. This photo shows a sister listening compassionately rather than talking or giving the advice particularly. The caption includes a call for action for connecting with a spiritual director. I was and am proud of these stories and this issue. Many design elements contribute to the quality of the communication as well. Without them, the quick hits that allow you to pop into the story at multiple places, it's harder to hook your reader. Chris?
As the design and layout of our covers changed, naturally, the interior of Connecting Point was going to evolve along these same lines. Let me show you some examples of these design changes. Looking from left to right, you'll notice that the earliest edition has two evenly width columns. As we move to the middle, we decided let's break this out into 3 columns. The third one in, Resurrection, shows our attempts to also break the mold a little bit here and there. Lastly, the last edition, we settled on 2 uneven columns. Also, placement of photos, size of headshots, and the different way that we treated images have changed as well. In the very first edition, you'll see that photos occupied the center of the screen and they would break up the 2 columns. Also is the obligatory drop shadow, very popular at the time. As we moved into the second and third editions, we decided that our photos needed to be a little bit more dominant, and we thought it'd be better that they anchor the top and the bottom of the space. The last edition, Cultivating Peace, at that point, we had a full spread cover as if it was a magazine. We decided it would be better used with photos if we could spread them across the entire top or bottom of the pages. Smaller elements like pull quotes also evolved. In the very first edition, it was simply italicized text, mainly within the body copy. From there, we evolved into adding a little color, or maybe also making that text bold. In the third edition, Resurrection, you notice we used a small little line treatment next to the quote to draw it out even more. Lastly, in the final edition, we got very stylized with our quote, as you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner from Sister Margaret Murphy. Lastly, you'll see watermarks were used both in our first edition and our third one. In the first one, it's sort of peeking out behind the background, but it's a little bit lost. In the third one, we decided let's use this as more of a design element. Throughout the entire evolution of this publication, you'll notice all the stories are pretty weighty. They have a lot of meat to them. And we decided that we needed some white space, a little bit of white space to give the eyes a rest. And so we were very deliberate to open up these pages where we could with design elements. Another quick example of the evolution of some of these interior elements is the letter from the prioress. In the very first edition, it simply showed up in the back cover. After that, we thought to ourselves, in a lot of other magazines, you'll have a letter to the editor or from the editor right inside the interior spread. Why not put Sister Sandra's letter in the same place? So you'll see that there. In the third edition, we decided we needed to err on the side of readability a little bit more. Maybe that dark blue was a little bit hard to read the text on, so that evolved further. And in the last edition, we decided to give it a graphic treatment that matched the style at the time. The nice thing about Connecting Point was that it afforded us a lot of real estate to tell a story. And in a number of editions, multiple stories. Depending on the medium in which we're telling a story or sharing a theme, we may not always have the luxury of so much space. And that can certainly be said for advertisements, where we essentially have one shot to make a quick and very lasting impact. So let's take a quick look at some ads. The experience of collaboration on something like an ad is also much different than it has been for a larger publication like Connecting Point or some other long-form story. In the case of publications like those, I'd be working in my office, Susan would be in hers. We might give each other a call or an email or stop in, but with an ad, it's much more of an eyeball-to-eyeball experience. Usually it shook out like this. We'd meet up at one of our favorite coffee shops to get properly caffeinated, of course, as is necessary for this sort of rapid fire work. There's something about the buzz of being in a place like a coffee shop that certainly helps to fuel the creative juices. But before we had even met, Susan had already done her homework and some things had to be in place.
So knowing who exactly your target market is and what she's looking for is key. A lot of great research is available through such resources as the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, or CARA, through Georgetown University. It helps you determine the one single and coherent message to craft for the one single reader you want to reach. For example, the CARA study released in March of this year shows that 90% of women entering today are 35 years old or younger. This information alone is gold when considering text, image, and platform.
We also do a little bit more localized research, I would call it. And what I mean by that is that we look at other few things. Number one, what does the publication look like and who are its readers? Number two, maybe in part because I'm sort of a competitive guy, what is our competition doing? And thirdly, if the sisters had advertised here before, what did their ad look like the last year, the last time they were in the publication? And frankly, did it bear any fruit or ROI for them? Ad-heavy publications produce a lot to digest for the reader. Whether in magazines or newspapers, you often call what I like to call the rummage sell mentality. And maybe there's just something very Catholic about that. There's a lot to digest. Just about every Catholic parish I know has a rummage sale where people bring every bit of stuff or junk they have to sell. And I think sometimes this rummage sale mentality also reflects in these publications, so that everybody has brought literally every font, every color, and every photo imaginable into these publications. And it is a lot to take in and sort through. In other words, there is a lot of competition for your attention and for your eye.
That's why concepting is so important, both before and during collaboration. The goal is to drill down to the one thing that differentiates you or differentiates you in this ad. Don't include every last thing that characterizes your community. And also, don't get so general that you don't stand out at all.
So at this point, you've got a great theme and you probably have a pretty good idea. And as I said a moment ago, you now got to figure out how to compete for attention. So we got to stand out and we got to be just different enough to be memorable to the target market. Our first example of an ad here is a pretty good example of our efforts both to differentiate ourselves and to stand out from the pack. We wanted a breathable ad. You may recall a minute ago, I talked about the importance of white space, especially in publications where this ad was going to be placed. They were going to be pretty busy, and we needed to do something to stand out.
Because here's the thing. If you have the best theme in the world, it won't matter if your target market doesn't see it.
So via our work of conceptualizing the ad, we decided that something simple, something symbolic, and something very unique to the Benedictine experience would be our best fit here.
A best practice in advertising is to be very clear about what exactly you're offering. The Benedictines are not known for their ministry, so why offer that? Why show them doing something? They are known for their spirituality, but how do you visualize that?
So next we go through a workshop where we work through a number of options on a main solitary image. We considered some maybe obvious options like a rosary or perhaps the Benedictine ring, but those weren't that great.
Well, this particular Benedictine community practices more contemplative forms of prayer than devotional ones. So something like the rosary, even though it's lovely, wouldn't have been appropriate.
And so the strongest image we settled on was a book, The Rule of St. Benedict.
The Holy Rule offered two strong themes. This particular Benedictine alignment with the 1500-year-old sacred text is something that very few other congregations claim. They don't follow it. The other thing is that word at the end, together, aligns not only with the Benedictine communal lifestyle and practice of seeking God together, but also aligned with the CARA research that showed that inquirers value community.
So now we're at the point in the process where we actually need an image. At first, we scoured through what the sisters actually had in hand, but those editions were just a little too worn and weren't quite the right look. You can see here as an example on the left, something they had on hand, a red book that was very striking, but frankly wasn't exactly the right message we wanted to convey. And so we purchased a new edition of the rule and shot the photo ourselves. To finish it off, we made it just right by editing the photo slightly and gave the book a blue hue to make it more feminine. Our client for this next ad shown here on screen was the American Benedictine Formation Conference. Preliminary work by Susan set us down the path of best showing women coming from different walks of life, considering a possible vocation. So, how to show different walks of life and be good at it.
So we had a lot of things that we thought about, but discarded most of them. Showing people's faces, for instance, is great when the goal is to invite the reader to compare herself to the women in the ad. It's definitely valid in some cases. But if you want to invite the reader to see herself in the ad, or imagine herself doing what she's being invited to do, other tactics might work better.
So then we went through an exercise where we thought, okay, if we're not going to show faces, maybe we shoot them from the back. Maybe they're carrying things that represent their different walks of life, or perhaps their current careers, as they're all moving towards a call to religious vocation. But then the question becomes, well, what are they holding? And having decided that showing faces wasn't our best option here, do we really want to see the backs of a bunch of people's heads? What else could show different walks of life?
There are lots of cliched images for walks of life out there. They're effective, but did we want to climb on the cliche wagon? Footprints in the sand, beautiful, but cliche. Sandals like Jesus would have worn, again, beautiful, but other people have done it and are doing it. Was there a unique way to invite inquirers to see themselves as being candidates for this walk of life to the Benedictines?
Then we had a bit of a light bulb moment. Instead of trying to accomplish too much with finding the right mix of people or the perfect mix of feet for some photo shoot, What about instead focusing on simply what they were wearing when they arrive at this point in their lives? In the ad presented here, we have 4 sets of feet and shoes. The shoes on the left and the right likely belong to women in a more formal or career setting. The shoes on the top and the bottom are more playful or casual. I purposely placed these shoes on the top and the bottom because I knew I had the room to do so, but it was also very important to show the laces in both sets of these shoes, which are an important element of those shoe styles.
The 4 styles you see appeal to a range of different women, all of whom are welcome in the Benedictine lifestyle. And the ad itself reflects a level of simplicity, which is a Benedictine value.
Now take a quick look at the toes and the shoes. All of the shoes point inward at the message. I also added a blue background to keep it bright and cheery and impactful. I assure you there's no metaphor here about walking on water.
This is one of my favorite ads for a lot of reasons. Again, we work to identify a theme unique to the Benedictines, which is the sharing of prayer, purpose, and life. Chris will share how this text and the ad itself changed over time, but the theme was present from the start. The very first ad, which is this one, used a photo of 2 sisters walking into the monastery together under the bell tower. They're presumably coming home from work and or school, one with a businessy kind of briefcase and the other with a flowery backpack. We wanted to show them from behind to invite women to place themselves there, yes, but also to give the sense of retreating from the day's work into the house of God together.
Now here we see the progression of this ad, and it's pretty obvious from that first one. Not only did the design mature, but as you can see, the tagline evolved a little bit along the way too. This wonderful theme Susan had come up with also afforded us the opportunity to produce several options in a family of ads. Here you'll see we did use the sisters' faces to show what home at the monastery looks like. After all, they are the very people and the very faces that you will see should you make St. Mary Monastery your new home by accepting the call to religious life. At the same time, it made sense to show the physical home. In this case, you'll probably recognize using that same beautiful image of the sunrise outside of St. Mary Monastery that you saw earlier in one of the covers, A Connecting Point.
The text also evolved over time, repeating the word shared in relation to prayer, purpose, and life, because Benedictine life is a communal life, and that certainly sets them apart.
And I think Susan would agree that out of all the work we've done, this is one of our all-time favorite ad series.
Absolutely, absolutely. We don't have time today to get into it here, but all messages can and should be adapted for multiple uses and platforms. Shrink your ads when appropriate and put them into your newsletters. Excerpt a couple of paragraphs of long-form stories for your e-newsletters. Rewrite those stories for your blog. Tease everything on social media. Wherever you place a shorter version of the whole, make sure to put the whole story, adapted using best practices for online display, on your website. In wrapping up today, we thought we'd share a couple of communications tips. Mine comes from a question I'm asked frequently. How did you get her to tell you that? In a word, it's a function of curiosity. The questions I ask, aside from the business questions like, when did you enter and where'd you grow up, come from my own curiosity. I let the answers lead me and tell the story. Sometimes I find the story I was planning to get is not the real story after all. And that's interesting. So here's my tip. Let the interviews mold your story. You may think you know what it's about, but do your reporting via research and interviews. Keep an open mind. Something is bound to surprise you. The sisters would always ask for questions ahead of time, and I'm sure that you've had that experience. I would give them a few questions, but tell them that we were going to have a conversation and see where it took us. Don't be afraid to ask the tough and sensitive questions. Most of the time, the sisters will answer. As I said before, everyone wants to tell her story, and most are grateful for the chance to tell it all. Finally, when an interview doesn't work out, and that happens, you've got several choices. Some sisters won't mind not being quoted after all. Others will be happy to talk with you again to dig deeper into the questions. Others yet will be satisfied with just a photo that includes them. You know your sisters and how they'll react, but trust that they'll be open to your questions and may actually even welcome them. Chris?
I've got 2 tips for you today. First, find a good collaborator. That's what today is about in many ways. It'll open up other parts of your brain or your thinking that you may otherwise not engage with if things aren't drawn out of you. And it's frankly hard to be an expert at everything. In fact, it's impossible. As much as I think I may be a good or decent storyteller or interviewer on my own, I'm only really good enough to be dangerous, and not to the level of Susan. Recognize your strengths in whatever creative fields you're in, and then find good partners. Secondly, I'll share with you the best bit of advice I ever got regarding graphic design. Being good is more important than being original. I'll say it again. Being good is more important than being original. Sure, we'd all love to have the most creative ad or print piece of all time, but if it's not good and that it's not effective or as effective as it should be, or it somehow lessens the storytelling or confuses the reader, then it's not really doing its job. It's easy to get caught up in overthinking projects. I've done it myself, or even trying to be too creative. Keep it simple and keep it good. And that's also another reason why you want a good collaborator, to keep each other in check. Also, there's a tendency among creative people to sort of plateau and think, I've learned it all and I know it all. Find a partner to draw more out of you. I used to banter back and forth with Susan all the time about using the Times New Roman font in the work we did, like with Connecting Point. As a graphic designer, I'll tell you, in our world, we always joke that Times New Roman is the font you use when you just don't care. Now, to many designers, it's a throwaway font and a way of settling. But Susan was right to remind me, Chris, our audience here is 70 or older. They can't read that hip, thin, latest, newest Google font you want to use. Yes, it's beautiful, but this publication has to be readable. And so the trusty serif Times New Roman font at a nice 14-point size won out, as it should have. As I said, find a good partner and collaborator. They bring out the best in you and usually stop you from making bad design decisions.
Chris, I love the advice you just shared to remember to choose good over original. I use a version of it myself. Never sacrifice clear for clever, or choose clarity over cleverness. As for our collaboration success, this didn't happen overnight. It's taken time and persistence on both our parts. We had to put aside our own confidence that we were right and open up to each other's vision. Because of that, we've grown and grown better. We hope that what we've shared today benefits you in some small way. Also, I want to share my deep gratitude for your creative support and generosity over the years to me. I really wouldn't be who or what I am without CWR. That wraps up our portion of the webinar. Rob, thanks so much for inviting us.
Thank you. And there it is, the official thank you sign.
And not in Times New Roman, I'll note.
All right, well, we do have some time before the top of the hour, so we've been trying to keep an eye out for any questions out there through the chat. I know that it's not a flash conversation, so we're not able to really hear you, but if you can pop something up in there, if you have any for our panelists, that would be fantastic. I do have one, maybe to kind of lead us off. kind of a plant question, but it's something that I thought of while you were speaking. When you're doing your concepting, and I think of that as like kind of like playground time, it's like the most fun part of the job. How much time do you devote to that?
Well, it's evolved like everything. If we are meeting for coffee, and we likely will, if we're in the middle of a project, we'll probably meet, I don't know, once a week or something for a couple, 3 weeks. We'll meet for coffee for an hour and a half, maybe. And then we may be in pretty constant communication by phone beyond that. But, oh yeah, we really enjoy that.
And it sort of depends too. Sometimes we'll hit a home run a couple of sessions in, and sometimes we are racking our brains trying to get this right. So it sort of depends on the theme and what we're doing as well.
All right. Any other questions out there? Maybe through the chat or the Q&A feature. There we go. There's a response to one comment. There, yeah. We can see you.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right. And can you see you can see the comments? So Sheila has a question for you.
Brainstorming the right images for abstract concepts like spirituality, forgiveness. Well, the hand on the back is an example of what we came up with for showing that particular concept of spirituality, forgiveness in this case. You just bring it to your collaboration partner and you say, so this is the story, and we're talking about, resurrection. That too was a symbolic picture.
I think it depends too on the community that you may be working with. Going back to the Rock Island Benedictines, there's a bit of unique iconography in that monastery, in that chapel, that sometimes when these themes would come up, there might be a couple hands, so there might be something good for spirituality or some flames that were unique to them that showed themselves. Also, don't be afraid to sort of dip your toes in other pools. Sometimes you have to use stock photography. It's just the fact of the matter. And I personally like iStock photography a lot. And a lot of times if you type in these abstract terms, you'd be surprised what will come back at you. So sort of dipping your toes into other pools may reveal some things too.
Okay, we have a question on the Q&A. Cecilia out here in Southern California asks, do you work with an art designer or have an in-house art department or person? And I think that's really, you're collaborating, right? But any advice you can have about art designers or art departments?
I guess I may not be answering the question that she's asking, but I'll try. I was a department of one, so I found a good collaborator in Chris. I've worked with many designers over the years, and I collaborate as a stance that I'll have a concept ready. But with Chris at this point, the concept itself is better for the client if I bring him the problem to begin with and we sit down and we start talking it through. Then we come up with great things together.
Yeah, and I would say too, as a rule, whether you have in-house or not a collaborator, not all conflict is bad. You will draw out some very good things with even disagreements through the process too. So don't be afraid of that.
Okay, I think we have actually a live question that Brian can facilitate. Can you do that, Brian? Carol has a question.
Looks like she might be muted still.
Yeah, Carol is muted, so.
Okay. Well, while we work that out, there's kind of a follow-up question that we just asked about the art department. Susan in the chat asks about any tips for one-person department, which you were addressing. Do you have any newsletter or magazine templates that you use? No offense to Chris.
Hey, that's all right. None taken. God bless iStock Photography. I would say go to iStock because they have templates there that you can pull from that you could easily form a template out of. Some of them are already established. and some would have the elements that you would need to get started.
Well, and let me say this too, that once you have a template, it's easy to, or much easier to adapt it to your needs. To hire somebody to develop a good design for you in the first place that you can continue to modify. And I'm not gonna.
No, great point. Yeah, you
Yeah.
could just hire somebody like a designer once to do it, and then you can run with it. You get the keys to
Right.
the kingdom.
And,
Sure.
and we do have something on our website about that. So feel free to take a look and ask more questions if you have them. But it would be more particular to your community or congregation if you did that.
Okay. We did get Carol's question in through the Q&A feature, and she asks, any ideas how blogs should function in total communications?
You know, it varies from client to client as far as my experience goes, but it's just, I will say it's one more platform. It's one more way to reach people. All your readers are not going to be reading every one of your platforms or following every one of your platforms. To reuse your material, give it a dusting, give it something different, even if you just start it differently. And it shouldn't be anywhere near as long online as it is in print. Those things are just a good practice to include in your overall mix. Again, Carol, if you want to talk about this, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to have a phone call with you about it.
Okay. Carol says, thanks.
Yeah.
Angie asks, do you have any other resources for communicating to 25 to 35-year-olds?
I know, right? Wasn't that an amazing piece of research from Cara? There are some really great books out there that some of our younger members have contributed to. And gee whiz, what's the name of that one? It's it was done by the Giving Voice group. If you could contact Giving Voice and ask them for some guidance on that question. They're all under 50, I think it is. And a lot of them are significantly under 50. So
another good thing is just sort of localized research. And so luckily I have Megan who works in my office with me who fits in that age group. So I'll pick her brain all the time. But if you have kids or family members, other people you know in that range, you have to meet people where they are. And it's good just to pick their brains and do the localized research. How are they digesting information? And then sort of apply that secular approach to your studies here.
Okay, if you're following the chat, there's a few for attendees, there's a few links in there that Brian's been really
Joanne.
great.
Yes, it is, Joanne.
Okay.
It's in our own words. Yep.
Yes. All right. We'll kind of do a last call for questions, and you can do that in the chat or the Q&A. I do have one before we jump out in case we get another question pops up. I've often said that we're competing with all media for people's attention, and so I will look at secular content all the time for inspiration. Is there anything that you look at that hey, this magazine is fantastic for graphic design? Any tips there?
Honestly, I find my inspiration in not maybe obvious ways. Like I'll go through like food magazines and other things that are so far off topic just to try to draw on inspiration. Usually it's oddball things like that, to be honest.
The other thing that I would suggest is to get out away from your office as much as possible, at least a couple times a week, and clear your head and take yourself on what, what's her name, Julia Cameron calls an artist date. Do it once a week. Go to the park, go to a museum, go to a riverbank, wherever you're going to go or whatever you're going to do something different. and let your brain have that time off so that it can make some connections for you. Unexpected connections.
But yeah, the unexpected connect, that's a good point. There, I have another client as an example who's a restaurant, and we were trying to figure out how to advertise them. And I went and looked at fashion photography magazines, and that directed the entire art direction for food.
That's fun. That's cool.
So weird combinations like that will unlock a lot of creativity.
All right, thank you both. We're near the top of the hour, and I'm not seeing any other hands raised or new questions coming up. So I would just like to thank you both, Susan and Chris, for being with us today and spending this hour with us. I want to offer a couple of reminders to our members that we have a deadline coming up for the awards program is June 30th. So check our website for that. And also to tease a couple of upcoming webinars, because we have one already next week, next Thursday. We have one geared for development called Familiar Challenges in a New Context with Melissa Spaz. She's from the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving from the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. So that's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to that. And Thursday, July 8th, are featuring a panel of our own members who developed this asset in the Chicago area. They will lead a webinar on the Meet Our Sisters tour. So hopefully you'll be able to join that. A survey will follow the end of the webinar here, as we tend to do. And the webinar will be available on the CWR website later on. So thank you for joining us today. And until next time, have a blessed day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.